Let's start right away. Please welcome Lee Unkrich, director of Toy Story 3. David O. Russell, director of The Fighter. Tom Hooper, director of The King's Speech. Deborah Granick, director of Winter's Bone. Charles Ferguson, director of Inside Job. Darren Aronofsky, director of Black Swan. And please welcome our moderator. He has been moderating this panel for the past few years. He is part of the family here at the Santa Barbara Film Festival. He's the editorial director of Variety and is a longtime columnist and is also co-host of Show Business on NBC in LA and San Francisco and San Diego, and in the house on the Anchor Network across the US, Sundance channels across Europe and Asia. Please welcome Peter Bart.
Good morning, everyone. I always thought this was perfect timing for this event because it falls right at the peak of that pagan ritual known as Oscars. So everyone you see here is both exhausted and also, I think, delighted to be here in this island of civility where people actually pay attention to cinema and not just to the awards buzz. So having said that, I realized that last year's panel we had a sort of a domestic nuances taking place because next to me was Jim Cameron and next to him was Catherine Bigelow. And as you and as you remember, there was some interesting little subtext or tensions. And I guess I should ask folks, is anyone here hooked up with anyone else? So, what all this is about is this thing, which most people don't see arrive today. This is the Oscar ballot. And I've been a voter for some 30 years. And the Oscar ballot is fascinating. There are really some obvious things to decide on, like 10 Best Pictures. You folks are familiar with that list. But as an Oscar voter, I'm also expected to vote on sound mixing. And like Salt is on the list of sound mixing. I remember when I saw Salt, I didn't leave thinking, boy, was that mixed beautifully. And makeup, one of the three candidates is Barney's version. Now, Paul Giamatti's a terrific guy. I didn't think his makeup was that great. But that is what we get. And arrived this morning, and 5,000 plus voters, like myself, are expected to fill it out religiously, which we do. So what I'm going to do this morning, folks, is to throw out my usual list of inane questions. And if it's directed at one person, I would be delighted if others also responded and maybe took issue with anything that I said or anyone else has said. But one question I couldn't resist is simply this. Since most of you here, Leon Rich, this is not for you, most of you here really made films on extraordinarily lean, disciplined budgets. I'm tempted to ask you, starting with you, Darren, if you had twice the budget and twice as long a schedule, would your picture have been better?
That's always the big question. We actually went out looking for, I think the original budget was about $28 or $30 million for Black Swan, and we ended up with 13 in the end. So it would have been better for me because I would have gotten paid. Because that's always the first thing to go is above the line. You know, it's like, okay, that's chopped off. Now let's start seeing how many days we can do this in. But I think, you know, that's always the boundary, that's the game for all of us of independent film. We've all come from that school. You know, you find out what your restrictions are, and then you sort of create a visual language that works, you know, within that. You know, when I had $60,000 to do Pi, you know, we chose to do black and white because I knew I couldn't control the color palette. I just didn't have enough resources, and I knew black and white would sort of cut that out of the equation. Actually, the black and white we shot was more expensive than color film because it was black and white reversal, but I knew we would be saving money because of all the savings we do in that. So it would have been a completely different movie. You create a film with the amount of time you have. In this case, it was 40 days, and we knew every day was going to be a struggle, which it was, and we just tried to push the limit of that $13 million every single day.
I remember running into Mike Nichols day after he finished shooting The Graduate, and he said to me, you know, I think every time that I had a compromise because of cost, I think the scene was better because I was desperate. Deborah, what budget was 2? How the hell did you do that?
Well, it depends on who's going to go down there with you. You know, you have to go with a group of people that want to work in that way and are willing. 24 and a half days means that some of it is shot in a documentary style in the sense that that's what the crew looks like and that's how they're moving. It's not that it's documentary techniques, but the actual structure, infrastructure resembles a very agile, mobile situation, and there are no sets. So, and the lighting package is tiny. Everything is about it being adroit and swift moving and low impact. Had we had more money, we would have crushed the very piece of land that we were, invited to work on. We would have rolled over the local participants. We would have been seen even more as outsiders as we already were. We were outsiders. And so the connection of our team with a local team, I think, would have been inhibited and marred by a kind of money that would be both intimidating and seem egregious, maybe unconscionable. It would have been hard to defend coming down with any more resources than we had. And I don't think it would have made it a better film for all the reasons of we didn't need to alter, we needed to be very quiet and careful about what we were filming, where we were filming. Mm-hmm. So I think for this production, I think the missing is like the 2.2, the 0.2 for the 2 producers that deferred their above the line situation, and so I think in this sense, a frugal budget was commensurate with the story we were trying to tell.
Yeah, just for the sake of the folks here, he who defers never sees.
Except when you have a transparent, honest, hardworking distributor like Roadside, who will absolutely make sure that those 2 women, receive their,
Tom, do you want to speak to that issue?
Well, I definitely think one of the differences is we'd had more budget. I mean, we made it for about $14 million on film, wonderful. Was that there were some people I collaborated with a number of times, and it is tough to keep going back and saying, would you work for less than you should, and keep putting in those favours. And particularly in post, where we really ran out of money. I mean, particularly on the sound side, it was very tough, the deals we had to do to get the picture made, and it would be nice to feel like you could you could pay people generously when you work. So that would be a difference. But I mean, I think the key relationship is the relationship between budget and scrutiny or oversight. In my head, one of the bonuses of working on a low budget is the level of scrutiny you're under from the financiers is much reduced, because no one's hugely anxious about it, because no one stands to lose a ton of money. And I think in the end, I've learned over the time I've been directing, the most valuable thing you have is your freedom. And I would always work for less budget to have that freedom. And that trade I would make every time.
Well, I wonder if one advantage to scrambling for the financing is simply that there is no studio to tell you what to do, because there are a bunch of financial entities. Now, David, I kept trying to follow how the fighter came together, and I lost track, so I don't know who you ended up answering to.
Rockefeller was at Paramount, and then it fell apart many times. Mark Wahlberg carried it for about 4 or 5 years. Brad Pitt was going to do it. Matt Damon was going to do it. They had a $60 million, $70 million budget. We ended up financed by Relativity. Darren was going to do it one time. Was that with Matt Damon, or who was that going to be?
Brad Pitt was involved for a little bit, and then Matt Damon. And it was, yeah, I went through a few actors.
And then when that didn't happen, then you went and said, "I'm going to make this movie called The Wrestler," right?
No, I read The Fighter and thought it's an amazing story. And Scott Silver, who wrote the script, I went to film school with, and he's from Worcester, which is right near Lowell. And so I begged him to do it, and he eventually did it. And then went through a few actors, and then The Wrestler came together, so I did that. And then it was like, you know, more Bengay or girls in tutus. I did, so Dave.
Well, Leon,
How's that Bengay? How you handling that Bengay? It's okay.
So by the time it came together, Relativity financed it, and we had 11 below the line. 33 days, 3 days to do the fights, and 30 days to do the rest. It was the closest to my first film, Spanking the Monkey, which was more like Winter's Bone in scale. You know, we shot that in 25 days. I frankly liked the level of focus and leanness and no-nonsenseness that it gave us. And I think necessity breeds invention, keeps ego out. And we were unified in a humble kind of love for the people of Lowell and for the story. And that all came from Mark. So that was an asset from a creative point of view. And it caused us to be disciplined at the script phase, because the script must be gotten below 110 pages if you are to make a movie in 33 days. I mean, for me, and really, really do each one of those scenes.
that's only 100 pages shorter than Social Network. So Lee, I must ask you, having worked with Disney and Pixar, with limitless amounts of money,
but you know what? The thing is, yes, you know, I made a film that cost a lot more than any film at this table. But when you're making an animated film, because they take so long, because they take years and years. I worked on Toy Story 3 for 4 years, and with a very large crew. So naturally, that means it's going to become expensive. But I don't want anyone to feel like we have an open checkbook to make this movie. In fact, we were shielded quite a bit from the money that was being spent, and we were allowed to just completely focus on the creativity of making the film. And as everybody is pointing out, you always make better decisions when you have limitations, when the sky is not the limit. And every step of the way, we had limitations upon us, many of them self-imposed, because we knew that we would come up with smarter ideas if we had those limitations. So, I mean, I know that doesn't mean a lot when you've made a movie for $2 million, but I mean, it's.
So let me ask you a really stupid question. How do you handle adulation? I mean, everybody must come up to you and say, Toy Story 3, this is my favorite movie in the history of mankind. So did you ever just say to somebody, oh, shut up?
No, I love it. I spent the first year and a half of this movie waking up every morning feeling like I wanted to throw up over the side of the bed. Because there was an enormous amount of pressure on me to not only be making the new Pixar movie after a string of 10 that had all been very successful critically and financially, but to be making a sequel to the Toy Story films, which have been beloved for a number of years by people all over the world. I just knew there was a very real chance that I would go down in history as being the guy who made the crappy sequel to the Toy Story movies. A very real possibility that could happen. And that fear drove me each and every day to not let that happen, or to do everything in my power to not let that happen. So I love the adulation, because my crew and I worked really hard for a long time, and it could very well have gone the other direction. So we drink it in.
But see, everybody on the stage, it seems to me, the pictures you made moved the needle. They really had a significant impact in one way or another, except for Mr. Ferguson. Because the facts about Inside Job is that in the world that you depicted, nothing ever fucking changes. You don't do Do you feel that way on
Well, this part of the world isn't changing fast, that's for sure. The Obama administration has been a gigantic, tragic disappointment. I think the Obama administration will go down in history, at least in this domain. With regard to things like Egypt and other matters, the verdict might be very different. But with regard to these issues, which are very important issues about the structure and future of our society, when Barack Obama was elected, he had an extraordinary, unique chance to do something about these questions. He had an incredible mandate, a heavily Democratic Congress, the country was in deep crisis, and he had, a moment. And many of us, including myself, were hopeful, based on the things he had said during his campaign, that something would actually happen. And it was a huge disappointment when he took that moment and used it to appoint as his economic and regulatory team a group of people who had, in fact, caused this crisis. And
you might say he really had casting problems.
very, very severe casting problems, yes. And the new cast isn't any better. People who've just come in as replacements for the first set of people who left, they're not any better. In some cases, they're worse. There are several people at senior levels in the administration who arguably should be in prison, and that's disturbing. It's very disturbing.
Well, I feel you should get an Oscar. I feel you should get an Oscar for making the most depressing movie.
Thank you so much.
So, yeah, I read, as a New York magazine, I think that you changed during the course of this picture from being a control freak to being an out-of-control freak. What struck me as a very interesting description. Would you explain that?
I had no idea what that writer was writing about, so I think he was trying to make a point about this probably what happened between the fountain and the wrestler. I think, but definitely my approach to filmmaking changed. I don't know if it changed radically, but it was definitely going from a film where everything was very, very every shot was very, very symmetrical and controlled to, taking on this sort of cinema verite style and sort of allowing the actor complete freedom. It sort of came out of a necessity of working with Mickey Rourke, who, doesn't really respect marks or lines or directors or filmmaking.
Wonderful, but he's nice.
Respects the square footage in his trailer, and that's about it. I love Mickey, and he's one of the great actors, but it definitely changed the way I had to work. And then I tried to bring that with sort of the formalism, because someone like Natalie Portman, is incredibly disciplined and technical, as well as being really talented. So I could bring back some of the other type of filmmaking that I'd done earlier and combine it with some of the lessons I got from The Wrestler. So maybe that's it.
I think what the writer was also suggesting, that you wanted, in a sense, your actors, Natalie, to lose control of themselves, to be out there.
Well, I always talk, it's funny because people sort of accuse me of pushing actors, and I don't really push them. I just sort of, I kind of remind them of why they've started in the business. And if you go down to a acting school on Melrose Avenue, all you'll see is a bunch of, student actors screaming Stella, crying their eyes out, doing anything to emote. And I think, in the Hollywood system, it's sort of, people forget that. I've had actors on set when they're like, well, I can't do anything more than 3 takes. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you want to do, sit around the craft service table and wait for them to light for another 7 hours? This is our chance to, just do stuff. And this is, it's our set. Let's have fun and let's push each other. And, so I don't find actors ever lose themselves. I mean, Ellen Burstyn or Natalie Portman or any of the other kind of psycho trips my actors have taken, I think they're always in control. And acting on film, it's a 30-second burst of intensity. And then you call cut, and all the actors I've worked with, when you call cut, they're back to being who they are, you know, because there's a movie camera there, and there's the boom person there, and there's the makeup person in their face, and you take a breath, and then you go back into it. I think the intensity of the physicality of Black Swan, with the kind of emotional stuff, with all the training Natalie had to do, was really, really tough on her. But she never got that close to the edge, I don't think.
But Deborah, when I run into Jennifer Lawrence, I rarely have seen an actress who in person seems more of a contradictory character than the character that you had her play. That was an extraordinary performance in an extraordinary movie. Did you do a great deal of rehearsing with her?
Jennifer was very willing to come down to southern Missouri before the shoot and spend a week on the location. We were shooting in a family's holler, using their homes, the various homes that were in that family property. She was willing to work with the young girl that lived in the house that we were going to be filming in, getting to know the animals on the property, learning things that we did, skinning workshops. She learned all the things that she was going to have to perform in the film. She was extremely amenable to that. She wanted to have that time, and she was also willing to go back to Kentucky, her home state, prior to that, and just reorient, listen to the dialect, get herself re-steeped into things that she had known and observed. She obviously has not come from any circumstances that resembled the film, but hearing voices of people who were using the dialect from the region and the accent, huge help just to have that in her.
See, when you said cut, I can't imagine that everyone just went back to their basic characters in that environment, because those were characters.
I mean, this is exactly for self-preservation what Darren is speaking about. I mean, actors absolutely do. They retreat to many. My experience is limited, but they retreat to a place that is to recharge, to get ready to go again, to contemplate what might be done differently, to respond to something that I might be asking of them. So it's a very very lucid, precise kind of retreat that they perform, and I think it's almost like the only way to go. And I also think that it varies very much between the actors, in terms of how they actually regroup before the next performance.
But Tom Hooper, is the game changed when an actor, in this case like Jeffrey Rush, feels that he really discovered and developed, nurtured the material, and I guess helped the process of transforming it, as did you, from a stage play into a screenplay? Does that change the relationship between director and actor?
I think probably Jeffrey felt rather unanchored in the character.
I can't quite hear you.
Jeffrey felt rather unanchored in the character at the beginning because we knew so little about Lionel Lowe. I mean, we had no photographs. We didn't know how many kids he had or what they were called. We didn't know where he grew up in Australia. He was a character consigned to the footnotes, the marginalia of history. Because the English famously aren't very relaxed about the idea of the need for therapy, unlike here in the state of California. And I'm sure the royal family were a little embarrassed by it, and so it's not surprising it was kind of pushed to the margins. And I think, despite his involvement from early on, I know it was only when we discovered the papers of Lionel Lowe belonged to the grandson, and we suddenly had photographs of him, and we could see his handwriting, and we could see the way he wrote, and we knew how many sons he had, and we knew about his wife, and we knew fragments of his biography that Jeffrey finally felt that he rather than inventing this character, there was these wonderful clues to go on. But I mean, I certainly think it gave him a strong sense of ownership on the project, and I do remember one rather interesting moment when his representatives were fighting for his right to arrive 6 days before the shoot, and he got on the phone with me and said, "Well, it's 5 weeks before. I'm not doing anything. Why don't I hop on the plane tomorrow?" you know, and that kind of thing, when he's on your side and knows that it would be much more helpful for him to be there 5 weeks out in the same city as you, and then turning up and saying, why don't we start rehearsing, because I'm sitting in my hotel room, you know, that kind of, when you can form that kind of alliance with an actor early on, that he's carrying it with you, that makes a huge difference.
So David, I think the most discussed bit of casting, certainly, of any film is Christian Bale, who I notice in his acceptance speeches always responds in a different type of Cockney accent. So, how did you get to that place where you decided that he was right? And Mark was certainly part of that too, because Mark at some point, Mark Wahlberg had to say, he's got the better role.
I think what happened was that Christian so fell in love with the Dickie, to answer your awards thing about the accent, he so got into Dickie that his whole accent way of talking sort of morphed with Dickie's way of talking. And he said he hopes that people don't mind if Batman speaks like Dickie. Because he just loved it. And I think one of the reasons he loved it is that, you know, we have two types of casting in the picture which are against type, which I love to do and is very exciting for any director and very exciting for any actor. And when you add to that, you're playing real people with big hearts, that makes it all the more exciting, which is that Christian had never played such a garrulous, warm, outgoing guy, you know, which Dickie is. And he stayed in character all the time, and he loved it. And Lowell is a very, I hope you can feel it from the film, it's a very warm, real place. No pretense, real people, and they really love each other, and everything's on the surface right there. Every emotion, every failure, every desire, every anger, every love is right there. And that's what I loved about the people, that's what I fell in love with. Amy Adams, same thing, had never played against type like that, you know, so she was excited to play such a powerful, sexy, tough woman. Mark did bring Christian to the table because their daughters go to the same school. And he'd had that idea from seeing Rescue Dawn and The Machinist. He knew that Christian would disappear into a character. And when I was speaking to Matt Damon recently, he said, interestingly, he said, this goes to show that the right person is supposed to play the right role at the right time. Because I don't believe that Matt Damon believes that he would ever have disappeared into that role as Christian did. And I'm fortunate enough to think that my producer, Mark Wahlberg, says the same of me. You know, that Darren would have made a beautiful film, no doubt. And for whatever the movie gods decided, you know, this is the film that got made, which got changed into a different voice for whatever reason.
Unfortunately, Mark then did Hereafter, where he was really wrong for the role.
Oh yeah, I did ask Mark if you. I said, you know, you realize you're giving him the flashier role,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And he said, yes, I understand Christian's going to get the flashier role, and he said, I'm okay with that because I want to be in the ring, I want to be fighting, and he played a guy closer. He takes the quiet guy, the James Garfield style of acting, where you are just grounded and emotional and real, which allows Melissa and Christian to be big. And that's a very generous actor that gives you that bit of emotion. And it was Mr. De Niro who said to me he felt that Mark's performance was perhaps the most underrated of the year because it is so quiet. And it's nice to know that, you know, Mr. Quiet himself, Mr. De Niro, you know, actually felt that he wanted to say that. Like, he made a big deal out of it to me and to Mark. He doesn't make a big deal out of much, you know, so that was nice.
So let me ask each of you to answer this question. A year ago, when Catherine Bigelow was here, at the campaign, as it started, she did our TV shows, my wife, I remember, and we said to her, Catherine, this is going to be very intense, the Oscar campaign. You're going to spend months talking about yourself, and talking about the film, and talking about your boyfriend, and it's going to completely mess up your plans and your filmmaking agenda. And she said, I'm such a tough-minded person. It won't affect me at all. I'm going to go right ahead, develop my movies, and start shooting my next movie. Of course, it didn't happen. Catherine, who we love dearly, is still trying to get her next movie started because the whole process of the Oscar campaign didn't mess up her agenda and her way of thinking about what she wanted to do next. So I'd like to ask each of you as we go down the road, so you down, what effect do you feel that being involved in this ritual how has it affected you? How will it affect your filmmaking plans? And talking about yourself constantly, night and day, how does this build a certain self-loathing within you?
I think the self-loathing is important. I remember after Pi, I used to write in my journal, I don't know anything, I don't know anything, I don't know anything after success, just to try and keep, tough. And I think it's important that, with all the good stuff, you have to remember that the reason you got here is all of the hard work, and all the doubt and stuff. And there was tremendous doubt, 4 weeks before we started shooting Black Swan, the money fell apart, and I literally was going to give up, except for the threat of being beat up by Natalie Portman. So, and I was willing to give up because I had doubts about the project, which I think you always forget. I don't know, every time I go to a film, I get all the big doubts all the way up to the beginning, and then you forget those doubts, and it's important to write down all that fear so you can remember it's going to come up again, and I think if it doesn't come up, it's a bad thing. So, I don't know, it's, the whole circuit, I think, the best part's been the friendships that I've had. We were joking backstage that I could play Hooper and Hooper could play Russell, and we could do each other's lines, because we've done a bunch of these and we know each other's answers at this point. So all of us are trying to be fresh and tell new stories. And
he's just currently doing me, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's been the best part, is that there's been some, I think, probably lasting, comradeship between the filmmakers here, which has been a good part of it. And I think as quick as possible, on February 28th, we're all going to get back to work. So.
Charles?
Well, I'm kind of new to this. This is only the second film I've ever made, and this is certainly the first time I've had this incredible immersion into the anthropology of Hollywood, which certainly is different. It's not MIT. I've enjoyed some of it, I have to say. I've been to a couple of really nice parties. Some very, very good food. And I have met a number of wonderful and interesting filmmakers, both feature filmmakers and the other documentary filmmakers, who are very interesting guys. I met not all guys, excuse me. I recently met the two very good guys who did Restrepo, and my previous film was about the occupation of Iraq, so it was interesting to see their sense of a different war. I've enjoyed a lot of things, but it is also true that it has been very hard to carve out time to write and to work, and I love making movies, and I'm very eager to.
Now I know you're thinking of doing actually a dramatic, a theatrical movie next. Do you think, has that been stimulated by your proximity to infamous characters like David O. Russell?
With all due respect, sir, no, I'm afraid not. I've wasted a very substantial fraction of my life from a very early age, like 7, reading and watching thrillers, and I love them. If I could make Chinatown or something like that, I'd be just in heaven, just in heaven.
Deborah?
I think something very positive that I'm feeling about participating in this season is sort of seeing, it's really what you started the panel with, seeing that there's a crop of films that are being made differently, and finding kinship with other films that are made on small budgets. And I think it gives me a lot of hope, actually. I feel like it's a bit of a hopeful season, this one. And, I think the awkward thing at the beginning of the season was sort of just the woman question was awkward. That set me and Lisa off in a weird headspace, because hard to answer that one. You know, is there an effect from last year, and what does it mean? And so that one, I'm so glad that that's not actually being raised. I had trouble even coming up with good answers on that. But otherwise, I feel like another thing that was extremely rich about the season was seeing journalistic support for small films and seeing what they could do, how far they could go with writing contextualized, interesting information about films to actually get an audience for a paperless, for a film that had no billboards and no advertising. That to me is also, it's just a really hopeful sign. And so I feel inspired by this time that we're in.
Well, I think the only answer to the question, why aren't there more women directing, is just simply to say, well, why don't you ask Charles Ferguson, why does Obama keep on appointing people from Goldman Sachs? There is no answer to that question. You know, one hopes that there will be a lot more women directing. And in the early days of Hollywood, as you know, women had a real leadership role in writing and directing. They were the principal forces. Mr. Hooper, sir, do you wish to comment on the general thesis as to how has this ritual affected your life and thoughts and self-regard?
I feel a bit like Darren. I mean, what is that? I think it's Uncle Vanya, Chekhov's play, which ends with the line, work, work, work. I kind of feel, and unfortunately in my family that's sort of a mantra whenever anyone's having any kind of emotional roller coaster. The general medicine is get back to work. And I kind of feel that's the key. I feel, having observed, I suppose, aspects of the awards season from the outside over the years, I think the great risk is that you, as a director, become paralysed by it, and you start to think, how can I do better than that, or how can I be back in the same place? And I think that's absolutely chasing a full stop. I think, I didn't make this film to be in this position. Being in this position has been this extraordinary, wonderful, journey and stroke of chance. But I made it for that story, and I made it for the love of that story. And I think you have to go back and connect with those stories you love, and make another film to make the film. And then if this happens, it happens. But I don't think you can chase it.
David?
Yeah, I would echo that. It's a constant prayer of humility every day to keep you awake. Because every day you should say that, but then every day, all day, you're getting saturated in this experience, Because what I said at the start of it is, everything I'm going to get, we got. And that was my mantra from the start. I got to make this film with these beautiful people. I love the film. I'm going to get to make another film, another couple films, period. But then every day, you're out here talking to these guys, and you're talking to these audiences, and you can't help but get sucked into the whole thing a little bit, And I think getting back to work is the best way to do it. It's hard to do work in this climate, though, because I'm supposed to be finishing a screenplay right now, and it's such a strange change to sit down to write, from being in this milkshake all day. But I will say, I'm extremely grateful for it, because I had a bumpy couple of years, and I am grateful. And when you get, it's like anything, whether you're an athlete or anybody, you are grateful to be back up on your feet, and you intend to stay there when that happens. So I'm looking forward to doing some more pictures.
Lee?
Well, first of all, I think it hopefully goes without saying, I find it an incredible honor to be sitting next to David and Tom and everybody here on this panel, because I admire and love their films so much. And as Darren said, this whole season is a great opportunity to get to hang out with people and talk to other filmmakers whose work we admire. We're in a little weird position at Pixar because we're up in Northern California. We're in a bit of a bubble and this kind of filmmaking utopia, which is great. I wouldn't trade it for anything, but it can be a little insular sometimes, and we don't have the opportunities to interface with a lot of other filmmakers as much as we would like to. So this season's just been a great way to do that. But it's, above all else, it's just been an honor for us to be a part of all this, for me to be sitting on this panel with these other directors and to have received the nominations and been a part of these different events, because in animation we're often pushed off to the side. That's kind of been history, And from day one, at Pixar, with Toy Story, we tried to make films that transcended anything that had been done in animation prior, and we tried to make films that were cinematic and that had new stories to tell. And we think of ourselves first and foremost as filmmakers, so it's really just the ultimate honor for us to have been invited to be a part of all this.
But I feel that you guys would do the community, the creative community, a great favor if you made one real miserable bomb. You guys can have a totally impeccable record, sets a bar that no human being can really aspire.
I wish somebody would, so that I don't have to be the one. We have these friends, whenever they have a dinner party, the people who host the party knock over a glass of wine on the tablecloth so that nobody else has to be the one to get embarrassed doing that. I feel like we need to just, purposefully put out a cruddy movie and get it out of the way. I don't know that the studio would agree.
That's a funny premise for a movie, because if you had like a Pixar guy, like the opposite of Springtime for Hitler. Well, it is Springtime for Hitler. You just see, you got to make a bomb, and you just can't help it. It just keeps becoming a hit.
It's like the producers at Pixar.
It'd be a tough pitch, wouldn't it, saying, I need to do this film, I want you to pay me to do this film, so I can make a really bad failure that would be good for me. I don't think I would go for that.
So if you were, I think the worst moment of the whole process are acceptance speeches, because you always feel at these dinners you've all accepted, all of you on this panel have accepted something in the past month. And it seems to me that when people give acceptance speeches, they suddenly freeze and they feel, well, I can't say what I really think. I have to mention my ex-wife and my agent and my proctologist and my because they're all, this is my woman and son. So I was curious, and I'd ask this to each of you, if you really, forget the TV cameras, if you really were to give a totally candid acceptance speech, what would you
I have to go first again? Start down there, let me think about this.
You can do me again there.
Because it is tempting to simply say, thank Harvey, or thank whoever put up the money. Or, that's what it's based on.
I don't know. I'm not sure that's true. I think actually people do want to thank, because it's weird that we get the credit. Because, I'm going to sound like I'm making one of those fucking speeches, but it's true though that filmmaking is so collaborative, and it's just such a collection of so many people. But it's true. We can't, as directors, we really aren't good at any one good thing. We're just sort of dilettantes in a lot of things. We could sort of draw, we could sort of, work with actors, we could sort of schedule, but we have all these specialists that really know what they're doing, You have a DP who really understands what 7,200 degree temperature means for a light bulb. Wow, I don't even know if it's tons, I don't even know what I can get. I learned it in film school, but I don't remember. We're all like, put the 12 millimeter on, but we don't really know what it's on until we put our eye on the lens and go, oh yeah, that's what it looks like, So you're working with all these people, so it's appropriate to thank those people. And, I'm not paying for my movies either, so I understand, so I don't know, if I had to give a candid thing, it would be probably, at this point, I think there's like this postmodern thing, because you feel like you're not supposed to thank people, because the Academy made a big thing about it a few years ago, where they wanted you to go backstage and do all your thanks on the internet.
Exactly.
And then to do something creative in front of the crowd and to really cry, And so, I don't know, maybe they, I don't know. I have no idea what
Or to do the famous Jane Wyman thing when she accepted an Oscar for Johnny Belinda and said, I got this award for playing a mute, therefore I'm just going to...
Oh, so genius.
And then Joe Pesci did the great one, where he just sort of said, I forget what he said, but it was like 3 words. And
That's right. That's right. But on the other hand, a director could thank a particular filmmaker whose influence,
Good idea.
particularly influenced.
Cooper, you can thank me when you're up. Feel free.
Mr. Ferguson, is there in your field, is there someone who particularly inspired you, whose work, who you would express appreciation for?
Well, there are some in documentary film. I would say actually my principal inspirations have come from people who are really, ballsy about biting the hand that might want to feed them in order to shut them up. And the thanks that I give to Sony Pictures Classics in this regard is very real. I mean, they're not, I have to say that they're not loose with a dollar, which kept our crew very small, which makes it easy to thank people because there aren't very many people to thank. But they said that they would give me final cut, both contractual and real, and they fucking did. And, if you've seen this film...
Thank them. Just thank Final Cut.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Final cut, yeah,
Deborah, I'm curious what your feeling is.
Oh, God. I think, Darren, maybe we interchanged just then, because the collaborative thing, that's like my big word, because it's just like, there is no, a film by, I don't feel too good about that term. I feel like, I really appreciated one time when a filmmaker wrote a film by, and there was a colon, and then everybody that made the film with him were listed. That felt appropriate, that felt real. There's no filmmaker that makes a film by him or herself, and so the thanks has to be there. People got in the trenches with you. It is the most severe kind of, the English language gets paltry when it's that kind of thanks. It is a gratitude that hurts. It's a gratitude that swells up inside you, and you spend a year trying to give it back. Your emails always are scrambling for the kind of words that you want to use to even for the people in Missouri, it's been very hard to bridge that level of appreciation, to communicate the appreciation that we do feel. And so the thanks comes from this kind of desperate attempt. The thanks exceeds what you're able to communicate, and you spend a year trying to do it. And it's an awkward position.
Tom, how do you feel about that?
Well, looking back at the speech I made at the DGA, I feel the guy I really should have thanked. I was absolutely candid. Is Darren Aronofsky. I don't know why you're laughing. When I was 12 years old and decided I wanted to become a film director, there was this 14, 15-year-old kid living in New York, and he was making the most extraordinary films as a teenager, and I managed to see one of them, and that's where the journey began. In all seriousness,
So clear that didn't really happen.
before I get on to David O. Russell, I don't know. I do think speeches aren't. They're not all about us. I mean, they are. Most of the people involved never get, in any scenario, will never get the chance to be on that stage, and it matters hugely to them to be name checked, and it isn't all about me. And although people think it's your moment, it's actually the one moment you have to acknowledge the people who will never get any attention. And for me, at the DGA, to have my dad there, to be able to thank him and honour him, that meant more to me than anything else.
I can't beat that. I always want to thank a kabillion people, but then, I also feel like when I'm watching those events, that's when I glaze over. So I also just want to speak from the heart. I just want to speak from the heart and know that those people know that I love them and thank them all the time anyway. So I always try to remember them, and then I end up just having more of a spontaneous reaction. And really, in this case, it's there's just, I don't know. The people whose lives at home were changed by this, like the people in Lowell, Massachusetts, I think it's all for them, because it's been a nice thing for them to change the legacy of their whole community. It's been a beautiful thing for them.
Well, this question of like, who you'd like to thank and who you can't thank, or who you don't thank. You know, most films, the crews are very transient, right? They're just kind of, they jump from film to film, and you have this intense experience. I'm talking about live action, when you're this intense experience together as a group, and then everybody goes on their ways. At our studio, because the films take so long to make, it's very much family. I mean, these are people that are working together not only for over 4 years on one movie, but many of us have been at the studio for 16 years, and we've been really intimate parts of each other's lives, and we see each other's kids grow up. And one of the things that I always like to do, we all do, when we have the wrap parties, where we have our final big crew screenings of the films, is we really make an effort to thank the families of the people that work at the studio, because they're very often people making the sacrifices. They don't have their husbands home, they don't have their fathers home on the weekends sometimes, or all night sometimes. And this goes on for a very long period of time. Those are the people that I want to thank, because they're really never getting the credit. And they should, because they prop us up, and they let us do what we want to do, and allow us to live the dreams that we dreamed about. Let us have the careers that we dreamed about having. So, yeah, I mean, that's who I would like to thank, but I haven't, and maybe I should.
Well, I hope each of you wins. But when you do make your acceptance speeches, I never understood why people always invoke the pluperfect subjunctive and say, I would like to thank. Why don't they just say, Jesus, thanks, Darren Aronofsky.
This is, you know what, Peter, I said, my wife, she told me if I did nothing else, I was never allowed to say, I would like to thank. She said, that's the worst possible thing to say. You're right, everybody says that. I would like to thank, rather than just saying, thank you for this.
I like that he said pluperfect subjunctive.
Didn't go unnoticed.
So, another question, related subject. Since each of you has hit a home run, it's always an interesting issue as to what degree does success advance or inhibit you. I remember running into this great guy named Cuba Gooding Jr., who said that the worst thing that ever happened to him was winning an Oscar, because he said it changed the way I thought about myself. I felt I wanted only roles where I got the girl and was the leading man. I wanted more money than I deserved. He said that it really, like a significant setback in my career was success and an Oscar. So, to what extent do you think the fact that you guys did hit a home run this time will help or hurt your future? I don't know, I always pick on you, Darren, I'm sorry.
My strategy has always been to double down, which is, I've been lucky to have success, with most of the films, and then I just try to do something equally as difficult, if not more difficult, so that everyone says no to me again, and it gets me angry, and then I gotta really struggle to get it made. So that's kind of been the strategy, is just constantly keep saying, fuck you back, and let's just try to make something really, really hard. After, making The Wrestler, we needed $6 million, we couldn't get it. Everyone was like, why are you destroying your career with Mickey Rourke and making a film about wrestling, which no one's interested in? And after its success, it did pretty well. We thought doing a ballet movie with a real legitimate movie star like Natalie Portman would be easy, and it came down to one investor and one studio on the entire planet that would do it. So that's my recommendation to everyone, is make something equally as difficult and put the success that you have now on the table, so that more interesting stories will hopefully come out.
So if someone came to you and said, take the easy road, do a sequel,
Yeah,
you wouldn't do it?
no comment.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, David.
He's kind of doing it. Or not to your
Who wants to talk about David?
Mr. Big Mouth. Oh, I was going to say, I was actually speaking to Colin Firth at your party, and we were speaking about how, I was saying just how it's a blessing, I just say it again and again and again, to be working in this business even is a blessing, and to be part of this is a great blessing. And having said that, it does become a very strange experience where you get seduced about, like, how are you going to get recognized or not. It's very strange, and you got to watch out. It can affect you. And Colin told me the story of William Styron, the novelist who won a French Literary Prize, and it basically sent him into a suicidal depression that haunted him for the rest of his life. And I was reminded last night by Alexander Payne of an essay written by Tennessee Williams called The Catastrophe of Success, which Alexander gave to me. And I just think you gotta keep, and I'll quote, for my final quote, it will be Darren, which is, you said, you gotta pull your head out of your ass. You can't, I've had my head up my ass the last few years, and I'm gonna quote everybody up here. And this guy said, just get back to work. So that the best way to keep your head out of your ass is just get back to work and just focus on that stuff and keep it as simple and raw as you can. Because all that other stuff, like in some Greek mythology, man, they'll melt your wings or something.
Anyone else want to take a whack at that?
I think Noel Coward said, beware those twin imposters, failure and success. I think both can be damaging.
I certainly find there's a sort of slightly strange thing in the season where people say things like, wow, now you're really in a position to make a successful film.
If this part is a difficult part of the process, it's sort of a delicious part, but I would think in some ways the most painful moment as a filmmaker is when you take your picture and you show it to an audience for the first time. And I know, Darren, I read somewhere that there was nervous laughter. Audiences were uneasy a bit at a couple of the scenes. And you were pleased by that nervous laughter in a way because you were obviously making the audience uncomfortable. This was part of your ambition. But that first, I'd love to hear from each of you about what that first screening is like for that public. You never had a bad screening, did you? Yeah.
Well, our first screening was, we opened the Venice Film Festival this year, which was, amazing honor. And on one side was Natalie, who hadn't seen the movie. And on my other side was the 82-year-old president of Italy and his 84-year-old wife. And it was very, I just started to feel the sweat pool in my jacket. And I turned to it wasn't the prime minister of Italy, but the highly respected president of Italy, who when he walked in, there was like a 20-minute round of applause for him. He was like deeply, deeply respected guy. And I just bent over to him and his wife and I said, I'm really sorry about what's about to happen. I didn't know what to do. And I looked at Marco, who runs the Italian festival, and he had this, mischievous smile on his face. And Natalie said something really distant. She said something about smelling like her dog's asshole or something. That's how she felt. It was really disgusting. And I was like, shh, that's what I do. So the movie started, and it's a very hard audience, that first film festival audience, but afterwards he said to me, I tried to be Italian and not to feel, but I felt it. It was nice, and his wife was all full of smiles. So it turned out okay.
It would have been much more fun to show it to Berlusconi and a room full of his girlfriends.
Actually, I wouldn't have been sitting next to Natalie then. So, but the first real screening I had was at the Philadelphia Film Festival. I happened to be there, and that's when I sort of saw what an American crowd would react to it. And that's really always exciting. But I don't think you really ever know what you have. I mean, every time, there was no way we thought we would be heading towards $100 million with this movie. I would have been happy with 20, and so you don't know. And the same thing with The Wrestler. We finished it the day before we showed it at Venice that year. We had no idea that people would react to Mickey that way. So you're pretty blind until you really start to show it.
Charles, to whom did you show the picture first? I hope it wasn't Goldman Sachs.
That was interesting, actually. Until the film was done, I would say less than 20 people in the entire world, including the people who worked on it, had seen the film. Very small number of people. And so first we showed it to the people who run Sony Pictures Classics, and they were nervous, but happy. Then we invited everybody who was in the film to come see it. And Frederick Michigan, for those of you who've seen the film, sent in his place a public relations executive, which he needs. But the people who were in the film liked it. Of course, some of them didn't attend, but the rest of them liked it. Then the next time the film was shown was in front of 2,000 people at the Cannes Film Festival, 2 days after Wall Street 2 had premiered there. And 5 seconds before the lights went down, Oliver Stone walked into the screening. And I was nervous, but it worked out. So.
Deborah, what was your first screening?
Ours was Sundance. That was the first time it was shown publicly, and very similar. There's no estimate, there's no calculation about how an audience is going to respond, and I think people say, oh, well, don't you know some things going into it? Do you feel confident about some things? And some things you do feel confident about, and you know that you've responded for a year in the editing room to your DP's photography. You know that that the editor has been stimulated by a performance the whole time. He or she's never gotten tired of it. So those things are excellent litmus tests to know that something about the film has a tenacity and a verve. But again, will it hold together with the decisions you made, that you sweated out about the ending, about choices that both seemed really appealing, but you had to pick one. Did you make the right one? Those things all they just hang there. They hang there so heavy that first screening. And, it's very hard to breathe. Very hard you're ice cold. It's not, physiologically, it's not a positive experience. And so then it does take light, and the people and members of the audience do respond. Then you're willing to take the rest of the journey. That's that first night gives you this light about whether you're strong enough and can go ahead and sort of follow it, be a companion to the film and follow it and take the leap with it.
I agree, except the first night can be totally wrong, and that you may just have the wrong audience at the wrong time. I'll never forget as a young executive at Paramount, first time I showed The Godfather publicly, the first person at the end of the screening who came up to me was the head of distribution of Paramount Pictures, and he said, "Kid, nothing happens in this picture. There's no action, and ain't no one going to see it." So you got to be prepared for anything. Tom?
Apart from my editor, the first people I always show my work to is my brother Ben, my sister Rachel, my mum and dad, who have always watched my films first since I was a kid, and they're just great because they're incredibly tough. And whatever happens to me, they don't bullshit me. And if they kind of like it, then I know I'm probably haven't fucked up. So that's probably the most nerve-wracking first time I screen. And I shouldn't say this, I screen it to them before I even screen it to my producers. And then I suppose on the King's Speech we had a proper scorecarded test in New York in April. Which is the first time I'd ever done it, and I'd heard terribly bad things about the process from a lot of filmmakers and how the information might be used to manipulate what they're meant to do in the edit, and we screened it in around 21st, 22nd Street in this basement cinema where you could hear the subway going through every 3 minutes, and the air conditioning was so noisy, and I tried to kind of pull out of the screening and say, "Can we not do it somewhere else?" And it just felt like the most depressing place to screen my film, and it got 93%. and 93%. I mean, Tarek Anwar, who cut my film, has cut many wonderful films like American Beauty, and said in his life he'd only got one film in the 90s, and I was, of course, immediately suspicious and thought maybe this is a New York thing, maybe this is the audience. So I said, can't we test it somewhere different? So we tested it in Kansas City, and we got 93%. I'm wasn't sure quite what to make of it, but it obviously was. The good thing was it meant that I could proceed with editing it as I was wanting to, and so it seemed to be supporting the way I was cutting it rather. And so that probably the most precious thing was it didn't dismantle what I'd done. But in the end, for me, the true highlight of the process was the very first public screening in Telluride on the first Saturday of September at 11 in the morning, 10,500 feet in the Chuck Jones Cinema. And I sat between Colin Firth and Jeffrey Rush. And that's the screening that was particularly special, because I think the surprise to all of us was the humour and how the humour played. And I don't think any of us had realised that the humour would play like that. Because we didn't sit around, rehearsal going, how do we make this funny? I mean, it was really just not a conversation we were having. And to get that response from that audience, that was, and also I had Laura Linney in the audience, who's a good friend of mine since John Adams, and she took me down the mountain, sat me down for coffee and said, you do know what's going to happen to you now. And I said to Laura Linney, Laura, what are you talking about? And she just looked at me. Now I know what she's talking about.
David, I'd love to hear from you on that subject.
Our first screening was in Woodland Hills. It was a test screening, and it was about 300 or 400 people, and my dad and my stepmom, who I'm very close to, were there, and my son, who's the toughest critic of all, who's 16, with his best friend, and he doesn't mince his words. And he lets me know when he thinks I suck. And it was these 400 or 500 strangers, and then you have Mark come in with kind of his family, like his brother and his entourage. We just kind of hung out in the back, and I remember looking at the audience and thinking, God, what is going to happen? This is so interesting. And my editors were there, and the executives were there, and within the first 3 minutes, I could feel that they were in with both feet. When Dickie's fists were coming into the frame at Mark when he's raking, they were laughing with recognition and pleasure, and I said, oh my God, it's so early in the movie and they already know and love Dickie, and they get the whole dynamic. And afterwards, we had the shocking thing, I kept telling the studio not to market it as a fight film, because I see it as a family story and an emotional story that has fighting in it. And it did, and the test results showed that the women were at 96, which I'd never been in the 90s period, and the men were at 90. So the women were higher than the men. That did not stop them from doing their male-oriented boxing campaign, and my son, it's the movie that he's been most proud of, and which meant the world to me and my dad and my stepmom, and so that was a beautiful thing. So that was my first experience.
We have a luxury at Pixar in that we regularly screen our films while we're making them over the course of the years. It's just part of our process. But it's very internal, and sometimes the screenings are complete disasters and we have to rip the films apart and start over. But on Toy Story 3, we somehow we were very lucky. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but from screening to screening, they were all going well internally. But there is always that day where it comes time to show it to the outside world. And Disney was feeling very good about the movie, and they decided that they wanted to reveal the film and show it in its entirety at Show West in Las Vegas, which is a big convention of theater owners. And I was kind of against it initially because the film wasn't done yet. We still had some animation to do, the film hadn't been scored, there was just a lot not done. And I hated the idea of the film being judged by that huge audience in that unfinished state. But they finally convinced me that that they felt the film was strong enough and good enough that it would play great there. So we went and showed the film, and I spent the entire film with my hands like this, like blinders, literally, because I couldn't bear to see even the slightest bit of physicality of the people around me, because I read so much into it. I'm like, oh yeah, they hate it, they're not getting this, they're not laughing at this. And like Deborah, like you said, it can be absolutely excruciating. It was just, I felt wrung out and terrible at the end, except for the fact that it was huge and it played great, really, when all was said and done. And the audience really loved it. And the thing that was best about that screening was at the end, we had a reception afterwards, and I had so many people come up to me and tell me that it was their favorite of the 3 films, which meant the world to me, because that's all I ever wanted. It was not to be better than, but to make a film worthy to be sitting alongside the first 2. And then also that so many people were crying. I had people crying, talking to me about the experience of seeing the film. And, you know, we would often cry as we were making it, you know, when we watched it. We did. But just for watching the film as well. I mean, there were scenes that, you know, that they were emotional to us for lots of different reasons. Part of it was that we'd been on this journey with these characters into the studio for a long time, and they meant a lot to us. And for us, it was kind of a saying goodbye to them as well at the end of the film. But we knew that that was us, and that didn't necessarily mean that the people out in the world were going to find it emotional. So, you know, there's been so much written about how emotional the film is, but we wanted the film to be emotional, but we never expected the kind of outpouring of love for how it made people feel that we got. And that first screening at Show West was the one that I really felt like we had something good on our hands, but of course I immediately flipped over to being paranoid that I was going to somehow screw it up as we came around third base and we're coming towards home, because we had so much left to do, so much really important stuff.
Now, I have not invited, we have a few more minutes, anyone from the floor who has a question. But we do have time for just a few. If anyone would like to ask a question that's as obnoxious as mine. Sir.
First off, I want to thank you guys for coming here. My question is for Darren Aronofsky. During Natalie Portman's Golden Globe acceptance speech, she mentioned, she thanked you for some takes. You give her the only direction of do this one for yourself. And I think that's awesome as a, hopefully a better director. But my question to you is, how would her performance change from previous directions that you've given her as opposed to that direction?
It was very different. Sometimes it would be amazing. It would just free her up, and she would just try something else, and then it actually wouldn't be the last one, because then it would give us an idea, and we'd keep going and exploring it. But the idea was just about, when you have everything you have, just free up the actor completely to just try something. And sometimes it wouldn't work, but that's the great thing about, that's the fun of filmmaking is, and the really great stuff is between action and cut, is when you really get to just explore the text and see how far you can take it. So.
I want to thank you all too for coming. This has been very instructive, and you've shared in a very personal way, and it's very much appreciated. I just wanted to say, this is for Charles. Peter said at the beginning that the other films had moved the needle in some way, and that yours, perhaps because it's a documentary, didn't. And I wanted to just tell you that for me, it moved the needle incredibly for me, because in all those interviews, A, I had the feeling that you were the smartest person in the room. And B, because of that, you were able to ask questions that revealed some really serious things about our system. And personally, for me, I mean, I've read Michael Lewis's, I follow this stuff fairly closely, but for me, if anything, it's amped up my skepticism about the way things are done at that level of American banking and finance. And I'm much more vigilant as a result of having seen your film. So I just wanted to tell you.
Nicely said, sir. I appreciate that.
Um,
Ferguson, talk about one for vigilance. Now,
Yeah.
Richard, so many people are waiting. We should-
I just wanted to say one other thing for all of you. If you're nervous about when you give your speeches, should you win, a couple of ideas. As you think, magic tricks, or throwing frisbees out into a hula hoop would be incredibly entertaining. So.
That's fair enough. Thank you. Thanks. Ma'am.
My question is for Deborah. You've talked a lot about people back in Missouri, and when I saw your film on DVD, in one of the extra features, I always remember one young man, I think he had a factory job, but he worked with you on your film, and he said it was a life-changing experience. So I wondered if he and some other people there have actually been able to keep working in film somehow.
Billy White, he has not been able to keep working in film, and the films aren't there. You know, he had to sort of uproot himself and go to, not even to St. Louis, which is mostly commercials. I mean, so it's a really hard question. The woman from North Arkansas who played Ree's good friend, you know, had to come to LA to see if she could find work. So it's really, that part is extremely hard to put that piece of that puzzle together. Where are the films being made? You know, I'm hoping more and more films get made in states that aren't being shot in, and that would allow actors like this person in a variety of far-flung states in this large country to try to participate in filmmaking.
I just wonder if, you know, sometimes people around might get bit by the film bug and then nowhere to go. But I guess it's still a great experience.
Sir.
This question's for Darren. I've noticed in most of your films, mainly in Pie, The Wrestler, and Black Swan, there's a theme of the characters' talent, skill, and profession driving them over the edge. I was wondering if that's a theme that you like to focus on in your movies, and if it's any sort of reflection on modern day humanity or modern day society.
You know, I've been asked the question a lot. I still don't have a good answer. I just, the themes of films, they come up, and they actually aren't the ideas that were, that theme which seems to run through most of my films. It's not really conceived. We're usually focusing on other themes in the stories, and somehow that filters in, which probably means, you know, I could spend some good money on therapy if I wasn't bothering all you people with these movies. So I don't know. I just I don't go deep into understanding why. It's just something that I've always kind of been focused on and keep drawing back to. And I don't know where it's tapping from or coming from. I'm not sure I really want to know. So just sort of ignore it. See what happens.
This came from something that David said. That you said. You didn't see it as a film about fighting, but the studio did, and they marketed it differently. So how did you let go of your projects that you worked so hard on, and even conflicts with casting at the beginning? If it is your baby, you've worked sweat, tears. So how do you resolve that?
I don't know. You just have to let go. You know, I mean, I watch people like Gus Van Sant and other people, or Woody Allen, who just like they're like Bob Dylan. They don't look back. They do their thing and they walk away. And so you have to, you know, after banging my head against the wall for 4 films, I realized, you know, I can chime in, I can tell them what I think, and that's it, because it's their movie now, you know, so it's their thing now. They're going to figure out how to market it now, you know, and it's got to, you have some humility and acceptance. And you have to help that it finds its audience anyway, you know, through people saying, you know, this film has a lot of emotion, it's a really great story. But you got letting go will always help you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This is a question for everyone, but I'd love for Darren to respond as well. I just really
so popular today.
I loved all of your films though too, and I was wondering when you were talking to your actors and also your crew members, if you are communicating your entire vision of like what you're seeing, or if you're working primarily with like that character for Natalie, or yeah, Colin Firth, or you know, your production designer, like if you're communicating the entire vision.
Well, I think the filmmakers definitely have to understand the entire vision. You spend, you know, if you're lucky, you get 10, 12 weeks of pre-production. And in that time, it's not just, you're also exploring. You don't really fully know what it's all about, but you talk it out with your DP and your production designer and costume designer. You want everyone on the same page. I mean, all the way up till the end when it's your sound mixer and your composer. You want everyone to understand the themes and what you're going for. And actors is a trickier situation. It's definitely focused on their character, because ultimately that's all they really should be interested in. They're not filmmakers thinking about everyone working together to be something. They just have to look at their journey through the film. They'll get hints, they'll overhear things, but I try to avoid, you know, the subjectivity of other characters and their point of views to the other actors. Like I would tell Mila a lot of things that I didn't want Natalie to know. And all the actors, I always work with them individually and then try to approach them and stuff. I know David will give a good answer on this. Because he's a great actor. So I'm curious, whenever you talk about actors, I learn, so please.
What exactly is the question? It's how you work with different actors?
Do you tell your actors...
Your entire vision, or if you're communicating just their character.
He tells his actors, never lose your temper on the set.
Being Christian will never have to be reminded of that ever again. You too make sure of that. We just want a little love rainbow cupcake time on set. It's true once that's happened to you. You know, yeah, I do tell them, you know. Sometimes you lean more one way with one character than with another because they're at odds with each other. So it's almost like you are, you know, playing both sides against the middle. You know, you're telling Alice and Dickie how awesome they are, and you really love them, and then you're telling Mark and Charlene and the sisters how much they hate them. And so you're playing two different sides, but that works. Amy would get in the van in the morning, and the sisters would say, "Look at that fucking skank," and she would say, "Well, Jesus Christ, we're just going to get coffee." Because they had everybody in character, and that was good for them, you know. My goal is to have everybody as comfortable as they possibly can be on the set, and to not know when the camera's running or not running. So that, and then they do beautiful things, you know what I'm saying? Because the more you make it like, well, here's the wall where we started shooting, and here's the wall where we didn't, the more nervous they're going to be. I do communicate to everybody that vibe, that it should be like we're all in this together, and the vibe of this, the love of the family. They get my general feeling. I think every director here could probably say that. They're going to get your feeling and your voice. And every director here is going to give that different feeling to that. Your personality, it's you. It's you. You got to put you in it, and they got to feel you, and that makes them want to put them in it. You know what I'm saying? If you put your heart in it.
Thank you.
So I'm going to have to close, but can I close by quoting my crazy friend Quentin Tarantino, who once said to filmmakers, "Do your best work when you're young, because no one over the age of 60 should be allowed to direct." Now, I don't agree with this thesis, but to everyone on this stage, you've done great work, and thank you for participating.